So today we're going to be talking about you're not done until you finish the paperwork. And that's I'm doing this presentation with my buddy Bill Higley. Bill is a hold on, let me get there it is. Bill is an attorney. He is hold on, technology, love it. Bill's an attorney with Aegis Law, and he specializes in doing estates and business planning, and is a very knowledgeable attorney, and also participates with Jazz St. Louis as a board member.
Well, thank you, Andy. I appreciate the terrific introduction, and I'll say also my partner in this presentation is Andy Magnus, CPA, a former IRS agent, a recovering IRS agent, a nationally known advisor, a speaker, writer, and humorist, of course. We all know that. And his firm is called Proactive Tax Pros, LLC. Andy, take it away.
Okay, we just have our normal disclaimer. Bill and I, of course, are professionals, and we disclaim our information all the time. So information that we're presenting here is not intended as legal or tax advice. There's no professional client relationship intended or established by attending the presentation. By all means, check with your local professional before taking actions, because rules do vary by state. So our goals for the presentation for today are to kind of not make you an expert at all, but to kind of give you an awareness of some of the pitfalls that you may run into, including giving you some tips and tools that you may use in preparing your paperwork to make you successful, and give you enough information to talk to your professionals and plan your next steps. We're not here to make you an expert. We just want to make sure that your paperwork is in place to give you the protection that you need. We're going to create a brick wall that can't be pierced, unlike the thin veil that the term is used, piercing the corporate veil, if you don't do your paperwork right. So with that, hold on. So Bill?
Well, I think that first of all, can we go to slide number 5? I think it is.
Sure. Okay. My thing is not doing right. Okay. There we
are. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at this slide. You're protected from personal liability from your business because you own an LLC or corporation. So this is important because one of the foremost reasons for incorporating or organizing in the form of an entity, a business entity, as opposed to a sole proprietorship, is protection of your personal assets from business liabilities. This is called sometimes the corporate veil. And if you're a sole proprietor, then basically you're out in the marketplace and you're clothed in the emperor's new clothes. And of course, there's very little protection from the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune in the marketplace. And so people incorporate or they organize in an LLC for the purpose of providing some protection. Now, most people believe this, that you're protected merely because you own the LLC or because you're the sole shareholder of a corporation. But actually, the real answer is it depends. And it really depends on several factors that are defined in the law. And if you want to take advantage of the protections that the law provides, you have to observe what are called formalities of separation between you. That is, separation between your exposure to liabilities and your business's exposure to liabilities. The law makes a distinction. So we see in this slide that, look at these 4 factors here. The law will treat you as separate from your business if you observe the formalities that are shown here. But your observance of the formalities has to be in writing, and it has to be preserved in some kind of a permanent record, a document, if you will. And the operations of the company. We see there in point number 3 how the company is operated and how the company is presented to the public. The operations of the company have to be consistent with the image that's held out to the public. That is, the public here really means customers and suppliers. Andy, over to you.
Okay, so why the paperwork doesn't get done. So often we know we're supposed to do the paperwork, but gosh, it just doesn't happen. And there's a myth out there. Just because I file the papers with the Secretary of State, that automatically makes me bulletproof, and that is absolutely not true. The thing that people don't do the paperwork is because they don't know what's needed or why it's needed until it's needed. So we're too busy working in our business and no time to work on the business. And we really don't understand the importance of that, especially with the single owner. If you own the company, many times you and the company, there's this very thin line in between, and it's hard to see that there's a difference, that you are very different than the company if you want the liability protection. And then, of course, none of us, I don't think, went into business to do paperwork. Am I right with that? Yeah, and most people do not like to do paperwork, and so it doesn't become a priority. It doesn't come to the top of our list. So we just deal with, instead of dealing with it when it shows up, we deal with it when it blows up. And we really don't understand the downside risks that we have. Bill?
So if we take a look here, why write things down? Why is that important? That's because if you don't have documents, you have memory. That's all you've got. And so memories are short, they're convenient, they're self-serving, and they change over time. History is constantly being revised. And Andy, I got to tell you, my memory is getting so bad.
How bad is it, Bill?
How bad is what, Andy? Okay.
Exactly.
So we can hear the groans from here, but there you have it. So there are 2 primary reasons for using what we call paperwork. One is to minimize the need to rely on memory, which, as we've just seen and demonstrated, is fallible and is not reliable. So the more words, the less you depend on memory. And the less words, the fewer words, the more you have to depend on memory. I look at it as kind of a football field with a scrimmage line that's going back and forth. And on this end is words, this end is memory. And the more of the field that's taken up with words, then the less of the field is taken up with memory, and vice versa. You have few words or a handshake deal, you've got to rely pretty heavily on memory. So that's one reason for what we call paperwork. The second reason is compliance with government or legal requirements, such as registrations or standards, or checking the box, or making sure you've appointed a registered agent or something like that. All of that has to be in paperwork, and until you get that done, you're just not done. Andy, over to you.
Well, today we're just going to be covering basically limited liability companies, or LLCs, and corporations. Some of the things may apply to other types of entities like sole proprietors partnerships, limited partnerships, and limited liability partnerships, and to some degree professional corporations, but we're basically just going to be focusing on the LLC and the corporation.
So
go ahead, Bill.
Andy. The law is set up. What happens in your company, that is minimal rules for operation, and you have a range of options within the parameters set by the law, but they don't count unless your choices are in writing. They're memorialized in a document. So that is to say, in both of the categories we saw earlier, that is both memory and government compliance, unless you document it otherwise, the law will dictate the rules. And in some cases, the law will impose sanctions if the rules aren't followed. So the law does not require you to be a good business person, a sound business person. That's not a requirement of the law. The law requires you to be honest, and the law requires you to be consistent. and not to be fraudulent. So if you're the sole owner, you are light on your feet. You make your decisions, and there's only your own rights and your own interests to look after. But where this gets complicated, and the most obvious example of needing to write down your decisions, is when your business takes on additional owners. So if you're the sole owner, there are only your rights and your interests to deal with. When others come on board and they own part of the business, then life gets complicated because they have rights and interests of their own. And also, there are all sorts of contingencies. What happens if they become disabled? What happens if they die? What happens if they get divorced? What happens if they decide to retire? If it's just you in the driver's seat, then those decisions are much simpler. But if there's other owners, then the law has rules for all of those types of events. And you have a range of choices to serve your business better, but they have to be in writing.
And the big thing about being in writing is understanding that you and the business are two separate legal entities. And in order to establish that separation, the paperwork has to be in place. So there's really two phases of this paperwork. One is setting up the company, and the other is how you operate the company. So getting it set up is vastly important because that gives you the base on which to build that protection from liability. How you operate it lets you continue to be protected, because if you don't get it set up right or don't operate it correctly, then your protection can fall away.
So if we look at this, the decisions prior to setup and the legal documents, these are primarily the government compliance category that we saw earlier. And that is, if you don't comply with what the law says, or you get the documents prepared and filed, you don't get the documents properly prepared and filed, the law will spell out the consequences for you. And the consequences are mostly financial. In the greatest number of cases, they're financial in terms of exposure to liabilities and penalties. Occasionally, there are criminal liabilities. It's not the typical case, but the law will impose financial sanctions. So Andy's going to add some detail here about tax consequences, that bottom line on the slide.
Well, the tax consequences you have to deal with when you're setting up is, what's your choice of entity? There's you have your entity that's set up by commercial law by the state, but then you also have tax considerations. A corporation can be reported to the IRS as either an S corporation, which does not pay tax, but passes the income through to the owners, or a C corporation, which pays tax on its income. Now, an LLC is much more complicated because the IRS does not have a designation that says LLC. So you may be a member of an LLC, which is the term we use for an owner of an LLC, but you may be reporting as a partnership if there's more than one owner. And so you're a partner for tax purposes, but you're a member for your dealings with the public, and it's important not to cross those over. So as an LLC, you can either be, if a single owner, you're going to report it on your 1040 Schedule C. If you're multiple owner, your default is a partnership. However, you can still make an election to be a corporation as an S corporation or a C corporation. The other tax considerations is we've got to make sure we understand we've got to treat the owner and the business as separate individual entities, and they're dealing with each other as arm's length. The arm is very short, but it still has to have the appearance of an arm's length transaction. We've got to make sure that there's money going in and assets being in, that we have something, that we have basically set up a company and it really exists. It's not just a paperwork trail. We've got to deal with the sales tax and income tax in the state of residence, money going back and forth between the company and the owner. Is it a capital contribution? Is it a loan? How do we structure things for self-employments? Don't try this at home. So
go ahead, Andy.
Then we go to the operating of the company.
So the previous slide was on the setup paperwork. This is on the operating paperwork. And one very clear example of the choices that you have within the law is what Andy mentioned. That is the election to be treated as a subchapter S or a subchapter C corporation, even though you're an LLC. So the law gives you those choices, and the choices may have significant advantages for your business, for the operation of your business, primarily tax. But unfortunately, if you don't get it done right, and if you don't get the paperwork filed correctly, then there are significant financial sanctions. Now, once the setup is complete, you have there's ongoing operations of the company, and the operating paperwork, this category that we have here, is all about consistency between what's written down and agreed to on the one hand, and how the company deals with the public, that is, customers and suppliers, on the other. So the law says that these are the rules, sets down the rules unless you document them separately, and you agree to something else, but then you act consistently. So ultimately, the law will, in most cases, hold your business to the standard of how you operate in the marketplace. That is, how you act out in society. Andy.
Then we've got some operating our tax considerations. Again, how do we get money in and out of the company so that we're dealing at arm's length with the company itself? We can do that either through loans, sometimes loans to the company, loans from the company. We can do it as salary. We can do it as distributions of profit. Making sure that you designate what is very important, especially if the IRS comes and looks and says, oh gosh, you're treating this like your back pocket. So maybe you don't get some of the benefits of being treated as a corporation, or maybe there's some other things we'll talk about in corporate meetings that you didn't follow the rules that you were doing. And so getting the money in and out of the company is probably the biggest issue many people have. And again, the key is good financial records. Then it's important to have company meetings. And you've heard of corporate minutes, and LLCs, really, it's a good idea to have minutes also to document any major decisions, because that way, again, the company has made a decision that you as the individual have approved. Any major actions that you take, how you get money in and out of the company, what kind of compensation are you going to be receiving, what kind of benefit packages are all covered in the documents of these annual or periodic meetings. The other thing is, for IRS purposes, you got to have some accountable plans. In other words, how am I going to be compensated for the use of my car? Is my car owned by the company, or is it owned by me? Am I getting reimbursed? So many different decisions. How are we doing health insurance for me? What expenses are going to be reimbursed? When you have multiple owners, sometimes one partner has different spending habits than the other. How do you account for that? Can the company reimburse me for the use of my home? There's a whole other set of accountable plans. And the thing about this is, in these meetings, make the meeting specific enough, but give yourself the out of saying, according to the following policies. So the policies can be changed and still be in compliance with the meetings. So again, we've got to do what we say we're going to do to be able to uphold this division between you and your company, and to be able to protect you, to again have a brick wall there, but not have it be able to pierce the corporate veil. One of the things I've heard about having minutes and documentation of these meetings is they usually appear at or near the time of the IRS audit or the lawsuit. Good idea to have them prepared ahead of time. So, Bill, what are the takeaways we want to give to these?
Let me go back. Let me say one thing on the previous slide, and that is about company minutes. As we said, the law is going to treat you according to the standard you set for yourself in the way you do business. And I see it all the time with clients who come in with corporate minutes that are years behind, and they haven't had annual meetings, and they haven't followed those formalities. the law is going to treat them the way they treat themselves and the way they do business. And so there is that hazard that the corporate veil of protection from liabilities may be pierced. But the other thing about company minutes is that many decisions have a time component, so that it is significant when the decision was made. It is significant when we started paying on a different scale. It is significant when we set a policy. And for that reason, minutes with dates on them in the paperwork are very important for establishing a timeline of company decisions. We can go to takeaways and highlights. So by way of wrapping up, let me say first, the law sets up protections for the public and for your own assets. That is protection from your business decisions. You protect yourself. You don't have to be a good business person under the law, but it would be nice to have your assets protected from your mistakes. So the law sets up those protections. You can modify the rules if your agreements are documented generally, and then if you stick to what you have written down. So you have to pay attention to how you hold your business out to the public, because that's the standard that's going to be applied to your own business. The law looks at you and your business as two strangers. And so as long as you observe those formalities, you should be fine.
And Bill, might I add with that, you know, it's easy to get overwhelmed with this. If you set it up systematically or you have a professional that will help you keep up with these, it's always a good idea. So what we say in E4E is kind of final thoughts here. Don't fly alone. It's important that, you know, gosh, you know, there's a lot of information that Bill and I have covered here that, as we said at the beginning, you're not going to be an expert at. So hire a professional. I've heard people say, gosh, I can't afford to hire a professional, but in reality, you may not be able to afford not to. So in the long run, it saves you time, it saves you money, and considering your downside risk, it's well worth it.